My friend's father, Frank, he was a fortune teller. And I was 18 the first time Frank told me my fortune. And truth be told, I don't really believe in the whole fortune telling thing. However, in the 40-some years since that reading, there have been numerous times where I have heard myself think, oh my God, that's exactly what Frank said was going to happen. However, there was one thing that Frank told me that I was certain was never going to come true. You see, Frank said that I was going to be married twice in my life. He said the first time would be for the wrong reasons, but that the second time I'd get it right. But let me tell you, when I was in the midst of a very ugly divorce from the father of my children, I distinctly remember thinking, Frank was wrong. I am never getting married again. Never, ever, ever. But it's funny how the memory works. So shortly after the divorce was settled and the kids and I were now moving into a smaller home, in the process of packing up, I came across an old box of mine that was just filled with memorabilia of my life. And sandwiched somewhere deep between my old gymnastics trophies and my childhood diaries, I came across this big, fat manila envelope that was stuffed full of love letters. Now, these love letters were all addressed to me, and they'd all come from a man that at that point I had totally forgotten about, and a man who lived very far away. Okay, let me explain this one. So, long before I had children, I was traveling the world. And home to me was basically wherever I was hanging my toothbrush that night. And my parents used to call me the Wandering Jew. But I think that was mostly just them wondering if I might ever settle down. And I sometimes wondered the same. But the first time I went to India, I was young, and I was quite naive, but I was totally open to the experience. I was like, India, bring it on. I can handle this. All right, but, and I loved India, the smells, the food, the colors, the smiles, everything in India just thrilled me. Actually, though, not the trains, though. The trains were another story. And especially as a young woman traveling alone, I got really good at, explaining that, yes, my husband is waiting at the next station, because it was just easier than having to deal with the passes and the come-ons that I received. So, but it got to be a little bit too much. So what I ended up doing, actually, was buying a motorbike in India. I got myself this little motorbike, and I figured this way I can travel and come and go through India as I pleased. And so I did. So one day, after a really long drive on the motorbike, I pulled into this small fishing village. And oh my God, this village, it was incredible. The beaches were insane. The seafood was plentiful. And Babu, the waiter who served it to me, he was delicious. Yeah, it was lust at first sight. I smiled at him, Babu smiled back at me, and before I knew it, we were walking hand in hand along the beach. There was a harvest moon rising. Babu placed a string of flowers around my neck and kissed me ever so gently on the cheek. At that moment, I felt like I had just landed on the cover of a Harlequin romance novel. And it was hot. I was enjoying it. So evening turned into night. Night turned into morning. And this probably went on for 3, 4, 5 nights. I don't even remember. It just carried on. Well, one morning, Babu, in his very broken English, came up and he asked me if I would come to a wedding with him. And I'm thinking, well, this is what I came to India for, these cultural experiences. And I've never been to a wedding in India. So, of course, my answer was yes. So, the day of the wedding, Babu brings his little sister over to my guest house. So she's going to help me dress appropriately for the occasion. And she didn't speak a word of English, so the whole process happened in pure silence, which was a drag, because I would have liked to ask her. I got a million questions. I wanted to know, like, as she's wrapping me in this red sari, I'm like, are you going to wear a red sari too? I wanted to understand. Bear with me here. I wanted to understand the significance of the henna patterns that she was drizzling, these paisley patterns along my hands. You know, and I also, like, I was really desperate to know, like, who's getting married? But I was left in the dark. I had no idea what was going on, so I just kind of went with it. And so with, like, bangles up my arms and these heavy silver ankle bracelets, she gave me a wave and deemed me ready to go. So Babu and I went on my motorbike. He drove, and I sat just like the local women would sit. I kind of perched myself side saddle on the back seat. I put one arm around Babu's waist and the other one holding onto my sari so that nothing would fall off. And I could feel Babu's pride because he literally took every street through that little village. Like, it was like he was parading me around, and I was feeling his pride too. Like, I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. And I actually remember thinking, wow, this is really India. I've truly arrived. I am here. Well, where we actually arrived was now Babu's home. And we were greeted by a sea of faces, like they were all strangers to me. And one man came out of the crowd. He took me by the arm. I think it was Babu's father. And he whisked me into the home, brought me to a room. The room, all that was in there was one big gray stone that even introduced me to the stone. He was like, this is God. So he put a cushion down beside God and told me to sit here and wait. So as God and I sat there, I was like alone in the room. Eventually a procession of people started to file into the room. And they all had gifts and offerings in their hands that they were placing down in front of God and I. And like, I had no idea where Babu was at this point. And things were starting to get really weird, especially when this priest-like man came into the room and he went over to the God and he pulled a speckle of red paste off of God and put a dot of it right in the middle of my forehead. And all I could wonder is, why is nobody else getting a dot? Why is it only me? I'm starting to figure this one out, but it's still fresh in my mind. This is not at all what I was expecting. And eventually Babu comes in, and he's dressed in what looks like fancy silk pajamas. He's got a scarf wrapped high upon his head. If anyone has seen that image of Trudeau in India, you know what I'm talking about. And at this point, like, the whole room goes silent in anticipation. But what happened next, I don't think anybody was expecting, because it's now me yelling across the room, Babu, who's getting married here? And Babu comes over to me. He kneels down in front of me, picks up my leg, and begins to kiss the top of my foot. Well, it took every ounce of restraint I had not to kick that boy in the teeth. This rage building up in me as I'm figuring out what's going on here. And the breaking point, though, was when Babu took a little dry fish off of one of the offering plates in front of God and brought it over to my lips, expecting me to open my mouth and eat it. At which point I grabbed his arm and I pushed it away and I said, Babu, even if I wanted to eat this dead fish, I could help myself. To which Babu replied, my wife, my hand, you eat. To which I replied, I never signed anything. I am not your wife. But I realized the urgency and I had to get out of there. So with the help of God beside me, I pushed my way up to standing and I beelined it out that door as fast as I could. And very much not like the local woman, I hiked my sari up, I got on my motorbike, and I drove off as fast as I could. Well, Babu caught up to me at my guest house, and he was visibly sad. He was in tears, and all he could mutter out in his broken English was, my wife, my only wife, my always wife. And I'm like, Babu, let me explain something. Marriage in Canada doesn't work like this. We meet, we greet, We date. It's not like this. But he wasn't getting it. And I felt like, look, I had to get out of there. So I did the cordial thing and exchanged addresses with him. But I knew full well I was never going to get in touch with him. I was out the door on my motorbike and driving off as fast as I could. But I realized as I was leaving the sadness that overtook me, the tears in my eyes streaming down under my mask, under my helmet. And I was thinking, like, I'm sad for Babu, I'm sad for what I've done, but I'm so sad for my own stupidity. Like, how could I allow these things to happen? What happened I didn't even understand how it got to that point. But at the same time, I was off to my adventures in India, and I'll say that just as that henna faded from my hands, so did my thoughts and memories of Babu. Until that moment where I sat there with all of these love letters, and I noticed most of them were not even open because they were all repetitive. They were all like, I missed you, I love you, my wife, my wife. And I started opening more of them, and the repetition came through, and it rekindled that feeling of like, what the hell did I do? What kind of fool was I? But you know what dawned on me? Frank, the fortune teller, he was right. That was my first marriage. And although it might not have been real to me, it was sure real to Babu. And my second marriage, that one, I did it right. I look at my kids every day and I'm like, yes, that was right. So, thank you very much.